Welcome to AJ's little shed shop. Today we're going to be going through some puzzle pro tips for the scroll saw. Now, I'm not a professional. I think I've done enough to say that I've picked up some pro tips and I feel like passing them on because why not? Pro tip number 1. With your scroll saw, make sure that your blade is exactly 90 degrees to the table. Get yourself a little square so you can butt it up and make sure your table is, so depending on what type of saw you've got, I've got one where my actual saw blade assembly moves and my table remains steady, so make sure the blade is back to 90. I've got positive stops, which is quite handy, but I still check it. Or if you have a table that moves, you undo it and the table moves and the blade remains still, make sure that table comes back to 90. Pro tip number 2, always go forwards. If you are pushing forwards, you're always keeping that blade at that 90 degrees as you're going through it. Try not to slide sideways, you will bow the blade if you're going through thicker wood. If you're in a curve, always push forwards and you shouldn't have too many problems. As long as pro tip number 1 is in place. Pro tip number 3, always have yourself a nice fresh sharp blade, or make sure you've got a good array of blades. Make sure you've got some for cutting through really thick wood. Make sure you've got some for cutting intricate and really thin work. My blades range from number 9s all the way down to 4-0, and I have metal cutting blades and I have wood cutting blades. There are some blades which are quite multi-use and multi-surface cuttable, and they're absolutely brilliant. There is so many, but if you read the package or you read the information on them, you can usually find out what it is that you're going to need for what you're going to be working on. But always make sure you have an abundance of them. Pro tip number 4, when you're working on your wood, always put down a masking tape or blue painter's tape on the surface that you're going to be working on. And then stick your pattern on that and then sellotape over the top. Because once you do that, the sellotape will actually give the blade a bit of lubrication to go through the material that you're cutting. Pro tip number 5, sand the back so it's smooth. Sometimes you might not notice it, like this piece here, on this knot, it's actually got a piece sticking out, and that can scratch your surface of your table, and it'll also make it glide better. Pro tip number 6, do a test piece. If you're going to be doing something where you are angled with the blade or the table, do a test piece and you'll find out if you have any problems with either your technique or if your blade is off. And then go back through that checklist from pro tip number 1. Pro tip number 7. This one's actually an important one and most people don't think about it. Have yourself near your scroll saw a brush, any brush, and clean your table in between your cuts, because any bit of sawdust getting underneath your wood that you're working on can actually throw it off and you may end up with a sticking cut or a sticking puzzle piece. So clean your table and clean your underside of your wood too, and it removes any excess sawdust that you may have. Pro tip number 8. Now, if you've been watching some of my videos recently when I'm making puzzles, you may actually have noticed this technique that I've been using, and that is holding a piece of scrap up against the edge of the wood as I'm exiting the puzzle piece or what I'm working on. What it does, it reduces tear out. As long as you're holding it next to it nice and tight, you get no tear out. Therefore, there's less sanding to do. Pro tip number 9. When you're done and you have a thick piece like that, this is only 18mm, but this is classed as a thick piece for a puzzle because this will stand up. But when you're done, chamfer the edge of every, I know it's laborious and it's quite a task and it's very boring, but chamfer the edge on every single piece. It will make every piece of that puzzle then pop and stand out more, and it makes it look an awful lot better than just having it cut flat. Pro tip number 10. Once you've cut everything, put it all back together, put it on a flat surface and sand it as one whole piece. That way you won't get any lower definitions, any dips and divots, or sand a piece more than another piece. So just sand the whole surface, top and bottom, as one piece, and it will remain a nice flat puzzle. Pro tip number 11. If you're doing decorative cuts, just lines putting in, they don't mean anything, they're not there for any reason other than showing a definition of something. Like this fire engine. Right here on this puzzle piece, there is this line here which shows the bumper, and that is just a line. It doesn't cut out, it doesn't do anything, it's just there to define where that bumper is. Get a piece of sandpaper, really thin sandpaper, poke it between and sand through. All you're doing is poking it in and pulling it through. It clears out the sawdust from inside that cut and it makes it look nice and crisp at the end. Looks like it's actually drawn on. Pro tip number 12, this one's important. Don't put a finish on the inside of your puzzle pieces. So say this is your puzzle piece, yeah, they go together quite nicely. On the inside of your cuts, where that blade's actually been, do not put a finish on the inside, because they quite literally may not go back together, or they might go back together and they might lock in place. If you are going to finish a puzzle, paint, give it a lacquer, then put it all together as one piece flat, lay it down and then spray it, or then paint it and give it details, only while it's flat. If you're going to do both sides, do both sides. I wouldn't do both sides. If you're going to spray it or paint it or varnish it, you can do the whole of the outside, but whatever you do, do not do inside those cuts. Pro tip number 13, always finish by hand. So once you've been sanding away, depending on what your method is, chamfering the edges, giving it a coat of something, always give it a final high grit finish with sandpaper, and always do it by hand, because then you'll be able to feel if there's maybe some weak parts or some parts which may need a little bit more sanding. Pro tip number 14. Now, I've had this problem just recently. If a part gets broken, which sometimes they do get broken, you can sometimes fix them. So I had it recently on a dinosaur puzzle I did, and the tail snapped. Just a little piece, it was only 2mm, maybe 3, snapped, flew off while I was dremeling it. I could not believe it. Luckily, I actually found it on the floor around my feet, managed to pick it up, and I managed to super glue it back in place. It wasn't perfect, but it did put back in place, and then I sanded that, and you wouldn't have known that it had been broken. I've had this happen before on things when I've been scrolling. If you can, pop it back together. But with a puzzle, you have the extra option. If that does happen and you really cannot get it to go back together, or it doesn't look right, or it looks like it's really been fixed, get another piece of the same species of wood. Say you've cut it out of this, get another piece of this, or use the scrap, and then just draw on that puzzle piece, cut that out. Now, I know it won't line up with the grain of the woods, so it won't look the same. So in that instance, paint it. It's the best coverall. It really is, because then you don't know that you've got a piece that's either broken and you wasn't able to fix it to make it look like it wasn't broken, or you've had to replace a piece. And then if you paint it, no one knows that piece was replaced. That's a good tip. Pro tip 15. I like this one. Get a Dremel. Oh dear Lord, get yourself a Dremel. Get a Dremel, or get a Dremel not Dremel, or a not Dremel Dremel. Any one of these that takes sanding drums, a multi-tool, Dremel-y kind of doobry, get yourself one of these. Or a shaft, a flexi shaft pen, get yourself one, because it will save you so much time when you're chamfering. If you're chamfering by hand, you know, depending on the thickness of the wood, the type of wood, the species, how hard it is, how soft it is, you could be there for days. Get yourself a Dremel, save yourself a boatload of time. Yeah. If you get a Dremel not Dremel, you can pick them up for 15 quid. In fact, I think you can even pick up battery ones like this. Obviously not a Dremel, and these are over 100. Not Dremels, you can pick up battery ones for around £30. You can pick up pluggy-in ones for around 15 quid. I don't know what conversions are around the rest of the world, but hey, that's a bargain. It will save you so much time. Oh, and then of course there is one other pro tip that comes with that. Get a shed load of sanding drums. Now, I have sanding drums that range from 40 grit all the way to 600. 600 grit is totally not an aggressive grit. It's fantastic. It removes very little and it works very well, especially when given a chamfer on my edges. That's all my pro tips. I hope you've enjoyed them. I think they're pretty good. I picked them up over my time with scroll sawing. I've been scroll sawing now for a long time. Definitely a very long time. I know. I'm older than I look. Thank you. You're my new favourite subscriber. And talking about subscribing, if you haven't, why not? And if you have, thank you very much. Why don't you hit that like button if you've liked the video, give it a share, click subscribe. Doesn't cost anything. Click for notifications, then you'll get to see all the new videos when they come out. Thanks for watching AZ Little Shedshop.